Part of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media. A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, your neighbor, David Granosky. So glad to be with you again for another journey through the news, guided by principles related to the personhood or individual liberties that we enjoy, not the collectivism that is continually trying to sweep away all of the different things that we fought to preserve in this country. And that includes our liberty. It includes our ability to think independently of Borgs. We don't have time for Borgs here. That's what you see on Star Trek. Unfortunately, that's what you see inculcated in our society today, from our government to our social media ghettos to the educational centers that we have. It's just a constant desire to get people to have unthinking conformity. That's what we were taught by our parents and elders to resist, and that is resist peer pressure. We're taught that growing up. Don't follow the crowd, they told us, and yet that's all these negative influences want us to do in our daily lives. So it's important for us to stay on guard from that. Joining us to unpack what's going on in the Afghanistan withdrawal is someone who has been calling for an end to this war for a long time. We have with us Colonel Douglas Macgregor. How you doing?
Fine. Good to talk with you, David.
Yeah, and it's great having you back on. This is something that you've been advocating for a long time, to get out of Afghanistan. You worked in the Department of Defense with under the Trump administration near the tail end of that term that he had, but it wasn't able to be fully completed during that time, but apparently it's happening now. So what's your latest take on what you've been seeing going on with this withdrawal effort?
Well, first let me express my sorrow at the loss of the 13 Marines that occurred over the last few days. I think that their deaths were eminently avoidable, and I'm sorry that they lost their lives. What happened, in my judgment, shouldn't have happened. I'll try to talk about that a little bit. I am very glad that we're leaving, and I think we absolutely must get out. There's no question of that. But I don't know how this more incompetently than what we've seen on television, what we've heard in the news, and what I've been told by people who are actually involved. And that's discouraging. But this is not a new problem. We've had a steady decline in the confidence and effectiveness of the senior leadership of the armed forces over the last several decades, certainly since Desert Storm, and it seems to have gone much more rapidly downhill within the last decade. The result is that the people that are in charge of this and planned it and organized it didn't know what they were doing. They made a lot of invalid assumptions about the environment they were going to be in, and they did not advise the president, or as far as I can tell, anyone else in the administration, wisely. And under normal circumstances, I think all of these people that are responsible, and that includes the Secretary of Defense, the former fourth-star Austin, along with General McKenzie, the commander in Central Command, whose responsibility ultimately was to plan, organize, and execute this whole thing, as well as some of the people that are now inside Afghanistan on the ground. I think the Marines, the soldiers, sailors, and airmen have done a brilliant job insofar as what they were asked to do, but they've been put in a very dangerous position unnecessarily, and that's one of the reasons we lost the 13 Marines. I think as time goes by, even though admittedly I'm sure many people will forget the events, at least short term, but I think we are going to discover just how bad this was. Maybe we'll discover everything, but we'll certainly get a pretty good glimpse of the enormous problems. So at the top, I think General McKenzie failed miserably, which surprises me, since Marine Corps officers normally have a lot of experience with emergency evacuation operations. So I don't know how he missed many of the requirements. I don't know how the commander of the 82nd allowed them to establish a perimeter that had virtually no standoff from potential attack. When the bomber approached, he was within 6 to 15 feet of the people he was successful in killing. And normally you would have at least 3,000 meters of distance between the perimeter and any potential adversary, because you're always interested in keeping any potential enemy of any kind as far away as possible. And then I doubt seriously that anyone would have turned over checkpoints and vetting responsibility of any kind to the Taliban. So these are all unforgivable, and we're paying a terrible price for it. We look ridiculous in the eyes of the world. We look stupid and incompetent. And that's not the kind of image that you want to project under any circumstances at any time.
So, I've heard people say, well, they shouldn't have closed the Bagram air base. That would have been a better place to evacuate. Do you have any other ideas that could have helped make this situation less bad than it's been?
Well, clearly the last thing you do is withdraw the armed force that's on the ground. And the first thing you establish is what's the real environment, and whom are we withdrawing? I mean, our top priority should have been American citizens and the citizens of allied countries. They're the first people you want to get out. Secondly, you absolutely want to move some people from Afghanistan, Afghans that is, who were intimately familiar with the U.S. military and worked closely with them. But I don't think that comes even close to the massive numbers that we have airlifted out. That just makes no sense to me whatsoever. Then we've already got plenty of evidence that a lot of the people who we lifted out are largely indistinguishable from ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and other organizations that are obviously fundamentally Islamist and anti-Western and anti-American. So that's all incomprehensible to me. But the very basic thing is, number one, what's the environment going to be like? What are the ports of embarkation that you want to retain? And Bagram was certainly one of those, because if you've been to Bagram, some of your listeners probably have been, they know that it's a very large air base with wonderful fields of fire that allow you to see and engage anyone that might interfere with you. 2 marvelous airfields, airstrips, extraordinarily well built, thousands of feet long, that can accommodate anything you want to bring in or get out. You would want to maintain that at least as long as you have anyone on the ground that is an American or an ally of any kind. Certainly it's the last place in many respects that I would have left. And the Kabul airport is the exact opposite, unfortunately. It's surrounded by high hills and mountains. It's hard to get into, difficult to get out, and it doesn't allow you the kind of standoff that would permit the security to be established that you need under these circumstances. I mean, the whole thing is just not a picture of competence and planning and organization. And finally, the worst time to leave is roughly from the beginning of May until mid-October, because the weather is favorable. It's what is referred to over there as the fighting season. Once you get into November and the bitter cold sets in, the mountain passes are snowed in, your enemy or your opponents are sitting inside their villages and caves next to the stoves and fires. They're not coming out after you, which is one of the reasons why President Trump, when I was asked to draft an order to get us out as soon as possible, when he sent me over to the Pentagon as the senior advisor to the acting Secretary of Defense, was designed to move us in the winter to get out in November and December and January. And ultimately that didn't happen. He was talked out of it. He got 50% of the uniform personnel out. But had we made the massive departure at that point, I think we've been infinitely safer. And clearly we would not have had tens of thousands of Afghans pouring into the airports to leave.
Right.
And I know many of your listeners must have also been struck by the fact that the numbers of Afghans trying to get on planes and leave included thousands and thousands and thousands of single young men who, to be perfectly blunt, should have been handed a weapon and sent out to defend the government that was there. But obviously they weren't interested in fighting. And they all wanted to get on airplanes and leave the country and come to Europe, come to the United States, go anywhere in the West where they could enjoy the good life. I think it's been a serious mistake. I think we're going to pay a terrible price for it, but then that's just more damage added to the million-plus illegals that have poured into our country through our open borders. So those things, the blame for those kinds of things are obviously the fault of the government and the Biden administration. It seems to want to deliberately fill our country with everyone and anyone they think could become an ally in their bid to permanently change the character, composition, and social structure of the United States.
So you think they tried to sell the people who have believed in, 7th century style Islam, they tried to sell them on liberal democracy, and since they couldn't sell them after 20 years, they said, why don't you come over here and share some of that 7th century theology you guys got over there and teach us how you do that, huh?
Well, I've seen reports that on average, 97% of the Sunni Muslims from Afghanistan are believers in Sharia law. Mm-hmm. So that tells you something about the thousands of people that are sitting on those airplanes. Of course, the reports of those people on the aircraft and how they behaved are terrible.
What is the Sharia law?
Commercial flights.
What's the Sharia law position on drag queen story time in every library?
Yeah, and alcohol and a lot of other things. But look, this is a tragedy. The greatest tragedy, of course, in my estimation, is that the American people were lied to repeatedly over 20 years. First of all, there was never any reason to stay in the country, just as there was no reason to stay in Iraq. We had a very clear, unambiguous target in Afghanistan, and that was Osama bin Laden and his little band. Well, Tommy Franks, who was then the four-star that commanded CENTCOM, failed in his mission to kill or capture Osama bin Laden and his inner circle. As a result of that, they went to the ultimate wellspring or fountainhead of all Sunni Islamist terrorism, and that's Pakistan. And they hid out there and are still hiding there, are still operating from the place. Right. So that was number one. Having failed to get him, then we decided to move in with large forces and stay, ostensibly on the grounds that we were going to change the country into something other than what it was, which never had any chance whatsoever of happening. We had lots of enemies that we didn't have. I mean, the people in that part of the world may not care for us, but they're not necessarily our enemies. But they became enemies because of the way we behaved in the country. Something similar happened in Iraq, by the way, and the same problem. Franks was again in command, and he was unable to track down and find Saddam Hussein for months and months and months. Frankly, once we had Saddam Hussein, we should have gotten out of the country. There was no reason for us to stay there. The only thing that we wanted to do was eliminate Osama bin Laden, eliminate Saddam Hussein, and in the case of Saddam, put in a different government that would be friendly to our interests and do business with us. We didn't really care very much what happened in Afghanistan, and the Taliban really was not hostile to us per se. The Taliban historically has never fought anybody who is not in Afghanistan on their territory. They're funded and supported by the Pakistani intelligence service. They're operating in the country as a strategic hedge against Indian and Russian influence in Afghanistan. So quite frankly, we had no reason to stay there and fight them. What we should have done is gotten out and then at the same time maintain persistent intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance to continue to track Osama. And I suspect we knew he was in Pakistan, and I suspect that we knew for quite a while. It's unfortunate we waited so long to deal with him. But those are facts, and the damage has been done. Today, Iraq is essentially a satellite state of Iran, and Afghanistan is in the hands of the Taliban that will now cooperate with anybody who is our opponent. And I imagine they're going to be interested in their cut of the drug trade. Remember that 93% of all the heroin in the world comes out of Afghanistan. It moves down into Pakistan. The Pakistanis are involved with distributing it, moving it into various countries. It also moves north through Central Asia into Eastern Europe and Russia, where it does enormous damage, and of course into Iran, where it does enormous damage to the Iranians. So the place is now the problem child, largely for Iran, Russia, and India. And it'll be interesting to see what they do and how they handle it.
We're speaking with Colonel Doug Macgregor about the withdrawal from Afghanistan and what the implications are moving ahead in foreign policy. You can call in at 727-587-1040. That's 727-587-1040 if you'd like to ask a question or send us a comment on our live stream. We'll be back in just a moment on A Neighbor's Choice.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a sixth-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR.
Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck on a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender. Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, David Gronowski, here with Colonel Doug Macgregor. As we look at this executed withdrawal of Afghanistan plan with Biden, it doesn't look very organized. A lot of folks are reporting that a lot of people, Americans, have been left in there, not allowed, blocked from the airport. Glenn Beck said the State Department was blocking his attempt to get Christians out of there, and Congressman Ronnie Jackson announced that his constituents are trapped in Afghanistan. They were blocked from the airport. They said the State Department isn't helping them get out, and the Taliban has threatened them. So it just seems like a mess. Again, Colonel Macgregor, what's your take when you hear those kind of reports?
Well, in these operations, the State Department is the agency that initially says we need to evacuate. They essentially trigger the whole process, and they have to sit down and meet with Army planners. The Army is usually the executive agency for large-scale evacuations like this, at least according to the law, but certainly with the CENTCOM planners, and describe who is there and who has to leave. I don't know whether or not that ever happened. I mean, it certainly looks suspicious. And it's hard to understand. We knew so many months in advance that we were coming out. Why we didn't initiate contact with all of the citizens, tell them exactly where they needed to be and when they needed to get out, and make provisions to ensure they did, and then instruct the military in what they had to do. We seem to have had talks ad infinitum with the Taliban. We seem to have had talks with others in the region, but we don't seem to have done the detailed, systematic planning that goes with these things. But if you pick up the various manuals in the Marines and the Army, there are very specific things the 2nd Airborne Division is supposed to do when it seizes or secures an airhead or an airport in this case, the kind of perimeter they have to set up, the firepower overhead and inside the perimeter that needs to exist. All of these things don't seem to have been addressed effectively. Not really sure why, but they clearly haven't been done. And so now we have this attitude, well, we're leaving one way or the other. If all the Americans aren't out, well, then I'm sorry, we can't do much about it, which, again, is incomprehensible to me. Because if I were on the ground as an American soldier, I would be disinclined to go anywhere until I was absolutely certain that the evacuation was complete. But again, this whole thing beggars the imagination.
We have Ian from Clearwater calling in. Ian, what's your question?
I got a real quick question and a comment. I enjoyed his summation of how this started vis-a-vis Tommy Franks and all that, not following through on the mission. My contention is this. Osama bin Laden and the 9/11 hijackers, Saudi Arabians. They were trained by elements within Saudi Arabia. Bush and company didn't go after the real target. This originated from elements within Saudi Arabia. We pulled our punches, didn't want to jeopardize the relationship with Saudi Arabia, didn't want to call them out. So we went after the wrong target, Afghanistan. Okay? The whole thing was illegal because Afghanistan never attacked us. Now, I'm not pro-Taliban. I'm not an Islamist. I'm not a peacenik. But Afghanistan never attacked us. It was like Vietnam. North Vietnam never attacked us. Afghanistan never attacked us. The real target, as far as I'm concerned, that was behind 9/11 was Saudi Arabia, or elements thereof. So I'm going to hang up and listen to his comment.
Thank you, Ian. Colonel Macgregor, any thoughts?
His name is Ian, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, well, Ian makes a number of very good and solid points that are deserving of more time than we have. First of all, he's spot on. Nothing was planned in great detail, nor rehearsed, per se, in Afghanistan. If we go back and look at the hijackers, Ian is correct. Most of them were from Saudi Arabia. They were all Arabs. There were no Afghans involved. The Taliban had no role in 9/11. It was an al-Qaeda affiliated sponsored operation, but it had nothing to do with Afghanistan. We know, for instance, that the hijackers planned much of what happened subsequently in Germany, near Hamburg. Then they came to the United States under visas. There were false pretenses because these people came as students when they had no intention whatsoever of studying anything. They then went about the country preparing themselves, including learning how to fly aircraft, commercial aircraft. The interesting part was when they were in Florida, your state, and learning how to fly aircraft, they halted the training before they learned how to land anything because they said it wasn't necessary.
Wow.
We don't track enough people that come into the United States that are foreigners. This was a good case of it. Then they stayed beyond the limits of their visas, and they became illegals.
Well, Colonel Macgregor, we're out of time.
Again,
yeah, we're out of time, but we really appreciate you coming on and giving us your assessment. We're going to keep following this.
Okay, well, thank you, David. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
God bless.
Thank you. We'll talk soon. A Neighbor's Choice will be back after this short news break.
What's everyone saying about the all-new News Talk 1040 WHBO?
It's an easy way to get news.
I like your stories.
It's my style. Really interesting conversations.
News Talk.
It's every day. From morning to night to the next day is on.
Once again, it's great. It's good for all of us.
I'm a new listener for about 8 months now.
You guys give me hope, and I wanted to thank you for that.
Tampa Bay.
The news and talk of Tampa Bay.
I just love that station.
News Talk 1040 WHBO.
Help's arrived, more's coming, says President Biden to mayors and governors in Louisiana and Mississippi after Hurricane Ida.
There's been at least one confirmed death and that number is likely to grow.
1 million power outages. ABC's Kenneth Moten at FEMA headquarters in Washington.
There are more than a dozen urban search and rescue teams of about 1,000 people assisting with those water rescues. 3,500 National Guard troops from across the country have been activated, deployed to the region. Nearly 4,000 FEMA employees deployed to 6 states, including Louisiana, Mississippi.
ABC's Elizabeth Schulze in New Orleans.
There are a lot of trees that are down. They are blocking the roads. There's a lot of debris that has flown into streets. As we were out here all throughout the storm, we saw signs come off of buildings. We saw roofs start to be torn up. These were really powerful wind gusts that were tearing through the city, and that's what they're trying to deal with right now as they're starting to recover.
Ida, now a tropical storm headed north. Chuck Severson, ABC News.
News Talk 1040 Tampa Bay weather forecast.
Good morning. I'm meteorologist Alan Archer at your 1040 WHBO Weather Center, where for today and tomorrow, skies going to be partly sunny, sticky high with only a 25% chance of a widely scattered, mainly afternoon or evening thunder shower. The high today, 91, low 77, up to 88 tomorrow. Much better chance of rainstorms, however, return for Wednesday and Thursday. I'm meteorologist Alan Archer for News Talk 1040 WHBO.
So today is the day that they're supposed to be completely withdrawing from Afghanistan, and yet we have been watching as reports come out that many Americans are still left behind, and people who were depending on America to kind of have their back, I guess, during the midst of this. And yet we've just heard from Colonel Doug Macgregor, and now we're turning to another guest who has been speaking about the need to wind down these endless wars. We've had him on the show before. We have with us Lieutenant Colonel Danny Davis. How you doing?
I'm doing really good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great having you on again. And you've worked with Defense Priorities, and you've been a senior fellow military expert with the group. And you kind of gained some notoriety in 2012 when you returned from Afghanistan. And Defense Priorities says you published a report detailing how senior U.S. military and civilian leaders told the American public and Congress the war was going well, while in reality it was headed to defeat. And so here we are now, and I want to just let you take it from here where you think things are going.
Yeah, that's sadly proved very prophetic. And actually, I had written a separate report in I believe October 2010, in which I said, if we don't make major changes, we will lose the war in Afghanistan. And I remember at the time that people thought that was just absurd, that even the contemplation of the possibility that we would lose was just laughed at and dismissed. And yet, the very fundamental reasons why I came to that conclusion are exactly what played out here, and then reinforced by the things that I talked about in 2012 primarily, that our senior leaders knew the truth, knew the same things that I had described, and yet lied about them to the American public. And that is really the main reason, that, like the overwhelming 90% reason why we've had such a chaotic and really bloody withdrawal here, especially in these last few days. Not necessarily because Biden, didn't do the job well. He did make some mistakes without question, but that was like 10% of the problem. The 90% was that 3 administrations, primarily Bush and Obama, had lied about what was going on. And instead of doing the right thing, say in 2014, I've actually just published something and said if Obama had just ended the war in 2014 or 2015, like he had originally said, none of this would have happened, because at that time, the Taliban owned like 6% of the country, the government, almost all the rest. We could have withdrawn in a very orderly and professionally conducted way over a predictable amount of time. The Afghan government would have had a chance to get its mind wrapped around the fact it's going to be required to conduct its own security. The military could have made whatever changes they need because they would have had enough time. And then when we left, it would have been a completely orderly affair instead of the extreme chaos we have here, because you can cover stuff over with lies for a long time. You can spin things for a long time, but eventually reality will impose itself on you at a time not of your choosing. That is exactly what happened here. You can't cover the truth anymore when the entire edifice of the Afghan government and military virtually disintegrated over a 10-day period.
Now, what about the statements you heard from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, where he was saying we had no information at all that would have led us to believe that this Afghan army was going to end up the way it did?
Well, we did know, and in fact it was widely reported that the Afghan government could fall within 60 to 90 days after this was over. And at that time, that was an alarming fast time. Nobody expected that from August the 6th, when the very first, provincial capital, which was Zaranj, fell, that in 10 days, every single one of the provincial capitals would fall, and then that Kabul would be handed over without even a fight. Nobody thought that would happen. They thought at least they would fight for those provinces, but once it started going south, it just, like a domino, everybody started giving up, because most of them were won without fighting. They were just won with negotiated settlement where the Taliban literally just negotiated the surrender of all these people, and they all willingly gave it.
So is this something that, again, would have happened even in a great case scenario withdrawal? I mean, how do you see this really?
Yeah, absolutely. There was no immaculate withdrawal, i.e. there's no way you could have, quote, done it right, because the whole core of the Afghan military and government were corrupt to the very core. I mean, they were rotten. And so it would have been exposed later, or it could have been exposed earlier, but it was going to be exposed because we had built something that just could not sustain itself.
I see. I've heard reports, even in the New York Times, they used to talk about ISIS getting royalty treatment from the Afghan government in Kabul back in 2018. I remember seeing reports in the New York Times saying that. So what's the story with ISIS's role here in this attack? They say the Taliban is sworn enemies of them. H.R. McMaster said on recently that he thought that perhaps they were working together with elements within the Taliban. And then again, you have reports in the New York Times suggesting that maybe the Kabul government that America had backed had some relationships at some point with ISIS. So how does this all come together in your understanding?
Well, look, that's just, that belies the overwhelming evidence. I mean, that's just a strange theory to have, because we know for years that the Afghan Taliban, and the Pakistan Taliban for that matter, have been mortal enemies of ISIS-K, because in fact they were formed off of the backs of the Taliban in both Afghanistan and Pakistan, because the organizations there weren't violent enough for these people. These people were just super violent, and they didn't want to have anything to do with even any kind of modicum of reasonableness or wanting to actually govern. They just wanted to kill people and blow up stuff. And so the Taliban has rejected them, and then they were competing for resources, competing for personnel, so the Taliban were after them. When this big explosion happened a couple of days ago and we lost those 13 troops, the Taliban lost 28 troops. Not many people have covered that, but I mean, how absurd is that? That, yeah, we're going to be their mortal enemy for years. We're going to surrender 28 of our own casualties just to make it look like that, something. I mean, that doesn't pass even the sniff test at all. It doesn't make sense. Why would they do that? And the answer is they wouldn't, and they didn't. So, no, there's no issue to that at all. The Taliban has been remarkably cooperative with us for somebody who had all the tactical advantage over us. I mean, they could have made our life tremendously worse than it was, but they didn't. And even after that explosion, they actually moved the cordon further back from the perimeter so that it would be even harder for ISIS, any future ISIS people, to get to the gates to do another suicide bomb like that. So for someone to say that the Taliban is working with the ISIS, it almost seems like they're wanting to just scare everybody to thinking that there's going to be all this terrorist activity that would threaten us afterwards. And there's no truth to that either.
There's a headline in The Atlantic that says Biden deserves credit, not blame for Afghanistan. Americans should feel proud of what the U.S. government and military have accomplished in these past 2 weeks.
Ouch. Okay. I do absolutely say that Biden deserves credit for what he's done, because he's the only president since 2001 that had the courage to stand up to this onslaught of the Washington establishment, the warmongers who love more conflict. He's the only one that stood up to them successfully and said, no, we're getting out, and then stayed on that. But, Lord, I don't know that you can say that we are proud of all the things that we've accomplished, because, we were defeated. How are you going to be proud of that? All the things that we say we wanted, like the advancement of civil rights, the advancement of women, children, being more in school and all that kind of stuff, all that was built on a foundation of sand, because, yes, we were able to produce it as long as we're there to facilitate it. But we built a government and a military that couldn't survive our withdrawal. So we don't have anything to be bragging about in that. In fact, it's to our shame that we just kept lying about it year after year. So I don't agree with the last part.
Yeah, when you look at this the reactions coming in online, you see a lot of folks who are, have been in the military, or folks tweeting out who are in the military, active duty guys, saying that there's a massive loss of confidence in the military leadership over this. There's a lot of folks saying that they just feel disgusted and they've been repulsed. Some have said, I feel like I have fought for no reason. So do you see that in your circles too, that there's a change that's happened here in the attitudes of a lot of people serving?
Well, without question, I see that almost uniformly among the people that I've talked to. But it's not so much of a change, but for the most part, at least the majority, and I mean like 65, 75% over time even, and especially when I was there in the late 2011, people on the ground knew this. Nothing that I wrote surprised anyone who's been there, who's been able to see it. And I'm talking about like at the tip of the spear, the guys who were going out on patrols, the guys who were leading these engagements with the Afghan military, the guys who were trying to train them, they all saw this. Now, every single trooper I ever met in the combat zone just bent over backwards to do everything in their power to try to make it better than before they got there. And to a large extent, they succeeded on a tactical level, but because everyone would withdraw, after a year, nothing was sustained. And that's one of the few things I do agree with McMaster on, that we didn't fight a 20-year war, we fought 21-year wars, none of which were ever completed. And, there's some truth to that. But the majority of troops that I saw recognized that this was never going to be successful, and justifiably feel angry today as to why the leaders refused to acknowledge what we all knew and just kept going back there over and over, and then getting the political people in Washington to support it, because, for the most part, they didn't know any better. They knew what they were told, or they knew what these generals said, and of course they thought they were telling them the truth, and it just kept perpetuating something that should have been over a decade ago.
Yeah, and Senator Ron Johnson says, and JustTheNews.com reports, Americans allegedly turned away at Kabul airport by U.S. military. So what's going on? Have you been able to look at any of that, or have you seen any news about that?
Look, there's so many reports coming out, like we used to say in the cavalry. The first combat reports are usually wrong, and they often lack context. They're partially right sometimes. I don't know what did or didn't happen, but I would not be surprised at all that there was lots of chaos. Well, we know there was lots of chaos, and things may not have gone the way they're supposed to. Some categories of people may not have gotten in that were supposed to. Some that weren't supposed to may have. I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me, given all that chaos, the difficulty, and the literal life and death nature of it, which is now we see that some people were actually killed, and actually quite a few, actually.
We're speaking with Lieutenant Colonel Danny Davis, talking about the Afghanistan withdrawal and the fallout, what this means. You can call in at 727-587-1040 if you have a question for him. Also on our comment stream, we have one. How do this month's events in Afghanistan change Pakistan and Iranian relations? Who benefits more, and will there be greater tension between these two states?
between Iran and Pakistan themselves, or between the U.S. and those two countries?
I guess between those two, but I guess we can take it to their relationship to America too.
Yeah, as far as the two of them, I mean, they're separated by Afghanistan, so I don't think there'll be a whole lot of issues there. I mean, look, they were there in the neighborhood 100 years before. They're going to be there 100 years afterwards. This is ultimately just going to be another blip in the timeline over this. So they're going to react and respond to whatever, like every nation does. Every single one of them in the area is going to do what's best in their own national interest. But it's not going to have any real impact on us, because our security is not really contingent upon what does or doesn't happen in any of those countries, and that includes Iran. And look, we have a tremendously powerful military that can project power from virtually anywhere, or to virtually anywhere in the world that there is a direct threat to America. And that includes Pakistan, that includes Afghanistan, even after we leave, and it includes, as we've seen, in Iran. I mean, we have taken out direct targets in Syria, in Iraq, and certainly in Afghanistan and Pakistan. So we do not need troops on the ground to continue that, because the majority of those troops, to include the one we struck ISIS with just a couple of days ago in retaliation for their murdering our troops, that was launched from, the missile was launched from Qatar and operated from the United States. So that just reiterates again that we don't need troops on the ground to take out direct threats to our country, wherever they may be.
Meanwhile, we have another question comes in. It says, sorry for joining in late, but wanted to know, do we actually know who ISIS-K is? Who is funding them? How closely tied are they to the original movement in Iraq and Syria?
Yeah, not very much. Other than ideological, this is just another offshoot in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And they may have missed this part, but these people are drawn from the ranks of the Afghan Taliban and the Pakistan Taliban, which are ironically two separate groups. But they are just very violent, and they don't have a kind of ideology that really attracts anybody. I mean, you could at least say for the Taliban that they had built a reputation for providing justice and providing some security, even though they ruled in other ways people didn't like, but they did have some positive aspects to them. The ISIS-K don't have anything. They're nothing but violent people, and that's why their numbers have not grown over the years. They've stayed somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000, and so they're really, frankly, almost irrelevant to the United States. The only way they pose a threat to us is if we have our troops on the ground in Afghanistan, and so that they can literally drive up to us and blow up. Absent that, they don't have the ability to project power. So they may be angry at us, they may not like us, they may desire to attack us, but they don't have the capacity to. And if they ever leave their area and they try to, then they run smack dab into the strength of our greatest strengths, which is identifying terrorist threats before they ever emerge to the United States. And that's why we've been able to keep safe all these years.
We're speaking with Lieutenant Colonel Danny Davis on the fallout from the Afghanistan withdrawal. We can take a quick break and return after this short message. But if you want to call in, you can at 727-587-1040, or drop us a comment on our live stream as we continue.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
David Grenos named Gabriel. Every day, Gabriel puts on his boots and drives across America to make sure our store shelves stay stocked with the food people count on. See, Gabriel served our country overseas. He knows that America stands for freedom, quality, and caring for others. the way we would like to be treated. That's why when Gabriel saw food shelves getting low during the pandemic, he hit the road as a driver with Oakley Transport. In the land of the free, where no one should go hungry, we need heroes like Gabriel to help keep America fed. CDLA driving professionals. Join Oakley Transport today. Keep America fed. Visit oakleytransport.com or call them today at 1-877-8-TANKER. That's 1-877-8-TANKER.
A Neighbor's Choice returns. We're looking at the fallout from the withdrawal of Afghanistan, what this means for all the folks involved on both sides as well as the world. And we're doing so with Lieutenant Colonel Danny Davis, who was a voice in the wilderness among many others. There was a lot of it, but it did get a lot of real serious analysis and support in the media because, as we've seen, the media is fully in bed with the narrative that any kind of war that we start needs to never have an end, apparently, because it's the first time that I've seen the media en masse really criticize the Biden administration. Have you seen that too? This is the first time. It's just like with Trump. First time he ever got praise from the media is when he did the Syrian strikes, you know?
I've actually seen a little bit of a different and somewhat surprising that a lot of the media has, actually been against Biden, not for pulling out, but for how the thing has been conducted. And it does seem to generally flow from the, perspective that, we shouldn't have gotten out. And, of course, they gave all kinds, and I mean every single network, as I looked, gave all kinds of airtime to basically the architects of this disastrous failed war where they lied to us. I mean, they're the ones that are called in to explain why Biden is doing it wrong, right? And, of course, what they're explaining that he shouldn't have gotten out, et cetera, when it was the exact opposite was the reason. But I will also say that I have finally noticed that there's more and more people at the major news network level that are giving some space to our side of this argument. I mean, even I've been shocked that I've been invited onto CNN, Fox News, BBC network, several different shows on each of those networks, and continue to get invited back to share the views. And they know what my view is. They still keep giving it airspace, so at least the other side of that story is getting out.
So do you see this as a opportunity for a real change of tactics from the D.C. establishment in terms of not wanting to start another interventionist campaign? They really wanted to do something, I guess, in Syria, and then they now they've been chasing back with Afghanistan. How does this approach?
Well, I think what you're going to finally see is not so much that these people who've supported all this stuff for 20 years are learning any lessons. I'm not optimistic about that, but what you do see is that even in the midst of this, the worst case scenario where all this stuff is going bad and Americans were killed and the chaos that has ensued as we're getting out, the polls are showing that a lot of people are giving blame to Biden for how it's going on. But even amidst that, there's still like 2/3 are saying yes, getting out is the right answer. The American people have been there for many years. And now then, as I said, you can't hide the lies anymore. So, they may be giving airtime to all these people saying that we should continue the war. But the American people are going, that's stupid. Why would we want to do that when 20 years didn't make them viable? Why would another 20 years make any difference? And, of course, the answer is it wouldn't. So I think that the media is finally catching up to the people because the people aren't buying this story. And, of course, if the people don't go there, then you're going to see the politicians fall right behind that. And then the media is going to fall with that, too. So you could see a swing of the pendulum back in a direction that is moving away from perpetual war.
That's what seems to be the that the problem here is that you've got a media class and a corporate class that seems totally on a different wavelength from where the American people are, and that seems to be something that's been around for a long time. But hopefully this is a moment where we could turn the page on this, because the media's narratives have really set the tone for a lot of people's apathy and, in other cases, zeal to go into a new conflict.
Yeah, and part of the reason is that the media's just like any other business. They need eyeballs on their product, and so that they can have ad revenue. It's all about making money. It's all about getting ratings, et cetera. And so they're going to put on, all of these, retired 4-star generals, retired, secretaries of this or that, or undersecretaries of whatever, people that used to be in the administration, or national security advisor, guys with titles, because that sounds impressive. And the problem is, those are the people who got us in the wars and who kept them going and then lied about it. What they have rarely done, and on a certain level you can understand, because they're like, okay, why am I going to put a retired lieutenant colonel who's like, 5 or 6 ranks below that 4-star general over there? Why would I listen to him? Because just reflexively you think, well, of course the 4-star general knows more. And so the networks have been reluctant to, put us on in these cases. But right now, because especially with, others like myself who have been, calling this out for years and specifically saying, here's what's going to happen if we don't change, and then it did. Now all of a sudden they're going, hang on, we don't want to look stupid, so I don't want to keep having this general telling me that day is not and black is white when I can see it's not, and our viewers can see it's not. So now they're starting to hedge on some of that, and they're giving space to a bunch of folks in our category.
Some people are saying now that China is going to be emboldened to do more with Taiwan. Japan has indicated they want to strengthen ties with military training and stuff with Taiwan. Do you see that as something that's going to be a potential fallout here?
Well, I mean, that's happening irrespective of anything in Afghanistan. The Chinese will do everything they can to exploit this embarrassment and this humiliation, because it's a great way for them to message and make us look worse on the stage, so people not believe in us less. But they are very clear, and I've actually talked to a Japanese diplomat here recently who said that China will say one thing in public, but they're actually concerned about this because they've always recognized, both China and Japan, and most other nations really, that the Afghan war has been a peripheral issue and not anything in our core interest. In fact, they've been puzzled as to why we didn't end this a decade ago. That was a quote from one of them. So China is a little bit concerned because now that will leave more attention, more capabilities for us to pay attention to them, and that's not something that they like. So I don't think it'll embolden them. I think they recognize that it might make their position harder.
Interesting. Lieutenant Colonel Danny Davis, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Do you have anything that you'd like to share with folks if they want to stay in touch with what you're doing or read any works that you've got?
Yeah, sure, you bet. I mean, I'd be happy for any of them to, my Twitter account is the absolute best way because everything that I publish goes out on there, and some of my viewpoints are shared on there as well. And that's at Daniel L. Davis, the number 1. That's my Twitter handle.
Well, very good. Thanks again for joining us.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
And we'll be back with hour 2 of our broadcast. But for now, you can call in at 727-587-1040. That's 727-587-1040. Or you can drop a comment on our live stream, and we'll get to it in just a moment. Godspeed.
Your home for news, talk, and information. 1040 WHBO Pinellas Park. Tampa Bay's all new News Talk 1040.
It's the only way I get news.
From ABC News, I'm Chuck Severson. War's over. The U.S. is now officially, after 20 years, over Afghanistan. This past hour at the Pentagon, the Central Command Chief, General Kenneth McKenzie.
I'm here to announce the completion of our withdrawal from Afghanistan and the end of the military mission to evacuate American citizens, third country nationals, and vulnerable Afghans.
This after the last evacuation plane just left a little while ago. During her White House briefing in the past hour or so, Press Secretary Jen Psaki was asked what the U.S. can do to prevent the Taliban from using any American weaponry left behind.
The world will be watching. We have an enormous amount of leverage, including access to the global marketplace, which is not a small piece of leverage to the Taliban, who are now overseeing large swaths of Afghanistan.
Earlier today, the Pentagon announced that this largest U.S. military airlift ever has evacuated over 122,000 people, a large majority of them Afghans, and over 116,000 of them in just the past 2 weeks. President Biden says crews from at least 30 states are headed to the Hurricane Ida destruction zone, where more than 1 million people are without power. FEMA officials and the president speaking directly to governors and mayors.
More than 5,000 members of your National Guard have been activated from Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Texas to support search and rescue and recovery efforts.
ABC's Elizabeth Schulze from New Orleans and the storm surge.
It was rising rapidly. We got a lot of rain here in a very short time, but the floodwater has already come back down. Those gates outside, they were never forced to be open. So that is one positive sign here.
Fire crews losing ground against the rapidly growing Caldor fire. ABC's Alex Stone.
Evacuation orders have expanded to include all of South Lake Tahoe. Areas that had been under evacuation warnings are now under mandatory evacuation orders as flames bear down on the town. There has been little to stop flames. It could burn all the way to Lake Tahoe.
ABC's Alex Stone. You're listening to ABC News.
Do you check your Google search results regularly? You should. People often get their first impression of you or your business online. Negative comments on the internet can impact your life and your livelihood. Take control of your online reputation. Get your free reputation report card at reputationdefender.com. It may reveal negative posts from an ex-employee, upset patient or client, news article, legal issue, or even exposed personal information right there in your Google search results. Uncover what's lurking on the internet about you with reputationdefender.com's patented scan and get your free reputation report card. Or for immediate assistance with your reputation, call 800-401-6681. Our cutting-edge technology helps make your Google search results look their best. Call 800-401-6681. That's 800-401-6681. 800-401-6681. Or take the free scan at reputationdefender.com.
Slamming the brakes on any going to Europe plans.
As the U.S. Delta variant numbers have taken off, the decision by the EU was inevitable. The 27-nation body is slapping restrictions back on U.S. tourists. The decision, fine print says, the U.S. is coming off the safe list of countries reversing advice given in June. The guidance is, however, non-binding, so expect confusing rules across the continent in the coming months.
ABC's Tom Rivers in London. An update on how much the U.S. is helping Haiti now that an earthquake aid mission has expanded into quake and hurricane relief efforts. Army Major General Hank Taylor at today's Pentagon briefing.
In Haiti, the U.S. military assets have flown 560 sorties, providing rapid logistical and airlift support, including delivery of more than 348,000 pounds of aid.
Magnitude 7.2 earthquake, August 14th in Haiti, killed more than 2,200 people, damaged or destroyed more than 100,000 homes. If you turn 100 and live in the Swiss area Freiburg, government officials will award you 100 bottles of wine. The Swiss newspaper Sunday Morning reporting the promotion. Planning ahead, officials say when one resident this November turns 100, in addition to the vino, they'll also give a bouquet of flowers to a woman named Marie Antoinette. No word if her wine will include a California brand called Layer Cake. This is ABC News.
Vaccines are not enough, and accurate thermometers are essential for everyone. COVID is once again a major concern, and fever is the key symptom for both the flu and COVID. An accurate thermometer, like the Exergen temporal scanner, is essential to detect fevers early and reliably. Studies have shown that non-contact thermometers are ineffective and therefore dangerous, as they create a false sense of security. Exergen is working with a single focus to ensure that everyone who needs an accurate thermometer can purchase one. Learn more at Exergen.com.
Chuck Sievertson, ABC News.
News Talk 1040, Tampa Bay weather forecast.
Good afternoon. I'm meteorologist Alan Archer at your News Talk 1040 WHBO Weather Center. Let's keep an eye to the southeast for a 25% chance of a widely scattered late afternoon, early evening thundershower. Otherwise, partly sunny and sticky hot with a high today at 92, low 78. Well, then tomorrow, partly sunny, still got a 25% afternoon thundershower with a high of 88. More numerous 65% Wednesday. Here at your weather station, News Talk 1040 WHBO.
This portion of the upcoming amazing broadcast is brought to you by the law firm of Catania & Catania, award-winning personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys, serving Tampa Bay families for over 28 years.
From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. And I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gronowski. So glad to be with you again for another hour of our broadcast today. We're coming to you live on FM and AM, as well as our live stream available on aneighborschoice.com. Remember, you go to aneighborschoice.com and you can subscribe there to get all of our content, because we don't just do this daily live show at Neighbor's Choice. We also do our podcast, Things Hidden, which is an online-only show, as well as exclusive interviews with the top scientists, medical doctors, and experts in the fields of nutrition who are radically rethinking, with data and science at their disposal, going back 100 years of data showing that we need to rethink our nutrition paradigm in order to rethink our medical paradigm, that perhaps 90% of the chronic illnesses in this country we've had over the last century could be averted if our government would stop subsidizing toxic vegetable oils and toxic levels of sugar that go along with exacerbating the problems of vegetable oils. So when you look at this situation we see today, it is a moment of reflection. When we look at the story of coming into the end of this Afghanistan war, it's kind of like the end of an era, and it gives us an opportunity to really reassess, okay, of the last 20 years, has this government in D.C., have they learned the lessons of their hubris, or are they going to double down? And we can guess, based on their actions, they're going to double down on trying to nation build. As Jeff Dice, the president of the Mises Institute, says on our show and others, that it's not just about them wanting to nation build abroad. They want to nation build in our own communities. America is a diverse country. America has a lot of different ideas and different cultures. And D.C. wants us to have one monolithic uniculture. They don't want us to have diversity of thought, diversity of religion, diversity of medicine research. They want one size fits all for everything. And that's a sad, bleak reality that we're not going to accept. The vast majority of this country does not accept it. It just so happens that everybody with all the megaphones, they're blathering all day. Most of the people with the megaphones are the ones pushing for toxic nation-building attitudes abroad and in our own domestic situation. It's a sad reality, but it's true that the people with the loudest mouths are the ones who seem to be the ones dead set on perpetually keeping us in never-ending war and conflict. It's a sad thing. And so that's one of the things that we want to push back against, to provide a signal that's not reactionary, but progressive in the true sense of the word, that we are going to build a better world in this moment of crisis, a world that's more empathetic, a world that's more intelligent. And that's the thing. We have to focus on the building blocks of what that looks like. If you want to have a better society for your grandkids or your children, you're going to want to make sure you do everything you can to get them out of government schools. That's the first step. Okay, because that doesn't mean that's the fix-all, because you can still do, homeschooling in a bad way. But getting them out of institutions that are fundamentally not in their best interest, not in the interest of having a social fabric that can hold and be sustainable. That's the first thing. Get them out of the failing government schools. You can do homeschool, you can do micro school, private school, whatever school. Just get them out of these failing government schools. And then when you start doing that, then you can start teaching them curriculum using mixtures of things online, things in textbooks, and things in your network, to give them the math they need, to give them the science training they need, to give them the engineering they need. We have a world that wants to tell people that excellence is a problem, that merit and showing up on time are intrinsically oppressive, that, you know, having achievement in engineering should be shamed if you have the wrong skin tone. It's disgusting, the trash garbage that these Luddite, troglodyte type groupthink ideologies are spewing into the minds of young kids while they have to have these masks on their face even when they play outside. I mean, imagine that, growing up in your most formative young years and you can't even see a smile. You can't even see normalcy. Everybody's trying to make you feel afraid all the time about playing outside, to be afraid of going outside. What a toxic, evil thing to teach to children. And yet that's what's happening in government schools. This is not an ideological fancy. This is a necessity. We must get our kids out of these government schools. And, you know, Fauci's going to help you maybe make that decision faster. He says on CNN, I believe that mandating vaccines for children to appear in school is a good idea. That's what he said in the interview. Mandating vaccines for children, not just for 12 and up, but 12 and under. Mandating them. And he points to the other vaccines have been mandated, but they always had religious exemptions with them. But furthermore, those vaccines didn't have nearly as many reports in the VAERS system as this one has in just a short time being on the market. And those other ones had long years of trials before they were put into kids, especially in an en masse way like this. So the guy's such a clown. He's such a quack, such a fringe quack. That's why he appears on fringe quack news outlets like CNN. You know, a garbage entity, trash entity. Not the only ones, though. You see this groupthink nonsense in almost every news story. Look at this headline. I'll show you how it looks. Look at this headline in Yahoo News, where they say Rand Paul, this is from Business Insider, Rand Paul says scientists won't study horse deworming drug ivermectin's use as a potential COVID cure because of their hatred for Trump. So this is a story that they've used this term. This is just one example. They do this in all the media. They keep framing ivermectin as a horse deworming drug. But it's also, and they're doing that on purpose, because when you hear the word horse deworming, it triggers your disgust impulse, right? Because deworming, worm, right? I need to be dewormed. That sounds like animals with worms in their bellies. That automatically makes you feel repulsed. Like, I don't have worms. So I don't need to be dewormed. I want to stay everywhere. I want to stay as far away from the concept of worming or deworming as I possibly can, especially when you attach it to animals. And they know that. These shameful groups. Now, the FDA is the one that pushed it out there in the first place. The FDA pushed out the tweet saying, you know, y'all stay away from, you're not cattle, stay away from the horse deworming. But it's not just a horse, it's also a human tablet form drug that is used by billions of people all over the world, you know, and it was designed by a Japanese scientist who won the Nobel Prize in 2015. Satoshi Omura. It's been recommended by Tokyo Medical Association with this pandemic. The chairman of the Tokyo Medical Association said this is something that warrants being used based on the data they've seen in places like Mexico City and Peru and so forth. But these imperialist punks, which are basically just low-life scumbags for the media, media's devotion to the big corporations and big agencies in D.C., they're low-life because they don't want to show the real debate. So they frame things with psychological trigger terms like deworming so that you automatically block out any intelligent exploration of the debate that's happening around the world. Places in India, places in Europe, places in South America, as I mentioned, places in Central America like Mexico. They have a different opinion. People like the Tokyo Medical Association, they have a different opinion. But these platforms do not like science. They do not like it. They cannot stand freedom. And they are salivating at the thought that we can adapt even more tyrannical policies like what's in Australia, where many people are not able to go outside but more than an hour a day. And many people, you can't go into any place without having a QR code attached to your private medical records. It's absolutely ridiculous. This is obscene. And so we have to start with the first principles, which is get your kids out of government schools. I had somebody tell me the other day, they were pro-mask mandate, and they were saying here in Florida how mad they were that their daughter's kindergarten class did not their school does not mandate masks. And I said, well, why don't you homeschool the child? And they said, well, I'd like to, but it was like a paradigm shift had happened. And I thought about it. If these outlets cared anything about people like CNN and Yahoo News, they would put that out there as an option. They would say, if you are upset with what's going on in your public school system, you can use these methods, because the State Board of Education of Florida, according to Corey DeAngelis and news reports, has seemed to indicate that they're going to allow people to withdraw their taxpayer funding their tax dollars allotted to their individual student and use that for a private or alternate schooling if they don't agree with the mask mandate policy, whether it's for or against it, masks in Florida. And so my point is, if CNN, if BuzzFeed, if New York Times, if Twitter would push that idea, hey, here's an alternative for you guys that are upset. If you go to a school district that doesn't force little kids to wear masks all the time while they're trying to have fresh air and stuff, if you want that kind of draconian thing, here's an option, homeschool. Here's a way to get resources for that, to get a scholarship, to get state funding for that. But of course they don't do that, because they are collectivists through and through, and they only stand up for the establishment. They don't stand up for freedom. So they don't want to come up with options or present news reports to people that gives people options. They just want people to feel so squeezed that they're at each other's throats all the time, which is what creates this level of distrust that you see seeping into our society. We cannot have the benefits of civilization without trust. You go to low trust societies and you'll see the difference between what we have in this country we've had and what we're about to embrace if we don't stop this slide into a low trust, collectivist, groupthink owned society. Christianity provided us with a high trust foundation. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Take care of the poor, take care of the widow, take care of the orphan. Love your neighbor. Forgive even your enemies. Love your enemies. These are foundational stories that have really shaped civilization to be where it could be. And we risk rolling those things back as long as we continue to worship this false Messiah that is presented to us in D.C., and that is the Messiah of the state. That government can be our nanny. They can tell us what we can eat. They alone can educate our children. They alone can tell us when to get out of the house. They alone can tell us what's our food. They cannot. They have failed utterly. They are the emperor with no clothes. They have discredited themselves. And I don't know why there's a lag, but we're going to speed up that lag and make it a lot shorter on a neighbor's choice. 727-587-1040 is the number to call, or write a comment on our live stream. Back in just a moment.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to CataniaCatania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck in a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of Loan Solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender. Who is your neighbor? Dave and Wally are team drivers for Oakley Transport. One day, they came across a very serious accident on the highway. Some might pass on by, but Dave and Wally saw there was no time to waste. They jumped into action and saved 2 people's lives with moments to spare. That's the kind of courageous love we need more of today. It reflects the respected culture Oakley Transport develops with their driving professionals. CDLA licensed drivers. Join Oakley Transport today for a rewarding career. Visit oakleytransport.com. That's oakleytransport.com.
Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. We are live and we're broadcasting from Central Florida, News Talk Florida, Tampa Bay across. Maybe you're listening to us in Tampa or St. Petersburg, Clearwater, or Sarasota. We know we got a lot of listeners down there in Sarasota, that area. Also in places like Brandon and Plant City, even Lakeland are tuning in. And meanwhile, we continue to enjoy our interaction with our robust and diverse international community, which engages us online on the podcast and the video show. So we appreciate you doing what you do to contribute to the show and the conversation that we have here. And speaking about, again, the failure of these government schools to do anything good, we have, and it ties in just with my general challenge to this whole pandemic policy. It's just chaos, really. Ignorant, incompetent, arrogant people with legal immunity and monopoly on power, and they're drunk with power, and they're doing a horrible job because of it. They have nobody to check their power. But you hear this new study in the body mass index among children and adolescents during the COVID-19 pandemic. And when you look at it, it says obesity of U.S. children 5 to 11 years old increased from 36.2% to 45.7% during the pandemic. Okay? This is published in JAMA, the JAMA Network, and it's a peer-reviewed paper. This is a study using Kaiser's Southern California electronic health record data. Kaiser Permanente or Southern California. I'm trying to get the name right there. So when you look at this, that's a horrible, horrible catastrophe. And your government, again, is leading the way with this. Fauci spends all his time going on to hack media outlets, denying the truth about what he did with funding that dentist security lab, biosafety lab in Wuhan. He spends, well, he doesn't talk much about it, but but my point is he spends all his time going on there sowing a narrative that is based in insanity for anybody to really take it seriously. He spends all of his time going in there telling kids that they need to be forced vaccinated with an experimental product that has had hardly any time with long-term studies measuring what's going on. Meanwhile, we have stories like the BBC, establishment, government-friendly site to say the least, BBC.com, long-lasting COVID-19 symptoms rare in children. King's College London scientists say that while a small group may experience prolonged illness, they were reassured that number was low. Headaches and tiredness were the most common symptoms seen And a Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health experts said the data reflected what doctors saw in clinics for children. A study looked at 1,734 children between the ages of 5 and 17 who were reported to have developed symptoms and tested positive for COVID between September 2020 and February 2021. Fewer than 1 in 20, which is 4%, were found to have experienced symptoms for 4 weeks or more, with 1 in 50, 2% having symptoms for more than 8 weeks. Others include a sore throat, loss of smell, headaches, and tiredness are the symptoms. On average, older children were typically ill for slightly longer than primary school children. Now, here's my point. I mentioned that obesity has risen from 36.2% to 45% during the pandemic for children in the U.S. age 5 to 11. So that means almost half now of kids age 5 to 11 are obese. We know what causes and drives obesity. It's the consumption of these vegetable oils in tandem with the sugars makes it even worse. And that's what kids are fed because they have parents who are going to government schools or whatever, and they're not learning anything about nutrition, but they're learning lots of things about garbage, neo-Marxist trash ideology, McWoke, trash, corporate communist slop. But they don't learn anything about seed oils. They don't learn anything about vegetable oils, same thing. They don't know about soybean oil, what it does to the mind. They don't know what it does to obesity. They don't know about mayonnaise on their sandwiches that they're eating, and they're getting the kids to eat this. They eat the fried foods. They eat the French fries and the Happy Meals. They eat this stuff, and then they get obese. And they say, I don't know what happened. He just done exercising. No, it's not the kid's fault. It's the fault of the parents, and more importantly, it's the fault of a society that is drunk in love with worshiping the state, and a state that is mentally not reliable to listen to because they don't have their facts correct. They have their facts incorrect. And they have a monopoly, and they set the table. They set the conversation. They set the discourse, and the media lovingly echoes it over and over and over again. But there's nothing about love in any of this if we care about our kids, because they told people to sit at home. So kids went from 36% obese to 45% obese during the pandemic. That's a huge spike. Sitting at home to let some union teacher teach them about garbage that make them hate their life and hate their race or hate other people's gender or hate people, just hate and toxic idiocy. And then they're getting obese during a pandemic, which is this is the opposite of what should be happening. That number, if we had intelligent government officials that would get the heck out of the way, or if they wanted to be nanny state people, which they shouldn't, that would be a disaster. But they're already nanny state people. I'm saying if they wanted to do the ethical way of being a nanny state, they could have helped get that number from children. If they really cared about kids, get their big comorbidity issue of obesity from 36%, they should have dropped it down to 15% during the pandemic, or 20%. Should be nothing, but there should be progress there. But they won't tell you the truth about vegetable oils because their big food companies own their stupid lying tails. And they don't care about you. You've got to understand this. You've got to take care of yourself. Stay away from vegetable oils. You can have fruits. You can have the sugars if you need them. You can have homemade ice cream, good stuff like that. It's not like you have to eat in a horrible state of paranoia. Not at all. You eat all the abundant good foods that humans have been eating for thousands of years. But you stay away from toxic sludge that your government has lied to you and told you should be eating, because they're the ones that have helped exacerbate this obesity pandemic for children age 5 to 11, going to close to 50% now. So let's take a quick break and return on A Neighbor's Choice.
Leaving a trail of catastrophic damage up and down the Florida coast.
Storm season is here.
It is unbelievable. This storm.
The time to prepare is now.
Hopefully you can all hear me right now. Whipping winds, relentless rain, carving a deadly path.
We'll keep you posted if a storm is headed our way.
And the worst of it may still be to come.
Plus, we'll be with you all the way through it. Your 24/7 news and talk companion. News Talk 1040 WHBO.
The U.S. mission in Afghanistan has come to a close.
Tonight's withdrawal signifies both the end of the military component of the evacuation, but also the end of the nearly 20-year mission that began in Afghanistan shortly after September 11th, 2001.
CENTCOM Commander General Kenneth McKenzie.
The last C-17 lifted off from Hamid Karzai International Airport on August 30th, this afternoon, at 3:29 p.m. East Coast time.
The general outlining the withdrawal efforts over the last few days.
Since August the 14th, over an 18-day period, U.S. military aircraft have evacuated more than 79,000 civilians from Hamid Karzai International Airport.
A deal reached between the U.S. and the Taliban, now in control of Afghanistan, required U.S. forces to be out of the country by the end of the month. But McKenzie confirmed that there may still be American civilians in Afghanistan who want to leave the country. Daria Albinger, ABC News.
News Talk 1040 Tampa Bay weather forecast.
Good morning. I'm meteorologist Alan Archer at your 1040 WHBO Weather Center, where for today and tomorrow, skies going to be partly sunny, sticky high with only a 25% chance of a widely scattered, mainly afternoon or evening thundershower. The high today 91, low 77, up to 88 tomorrow. Much better chance of rainstorms, however, return for Wednesday and Thursday. I'm meteorologist Alan Archer for News Talk 1040 WHBO.
We're live on A Neighbor's Choice. Glad to be here with you as we continue looking at the news. Jack Posobiec, who's a reporter, a conservative reporter, he said Biden is launching a new war on terror of reprisal drone strikes to make up for his failures as a leader. We now have reports an entire family was wiped out in the first strike. So, that's what D.C. does. They don't do anything competently. They just act like they're the experts, and they want you to just sit along for the ride so they can make fleecing off of you like a bunch of con artists and corrupt people do. Mike Cernovich comments on it. He says, not only did the Biden administration not kill 2 members of ISIS-K as reported by their media propagandists without confirming it, they murdered children. He says, blank these people, war crimes, indictments now. So, and as a commenter on our, says, they hate us for our freedoms, quote, is the quote they give them. As if that's the little narrative they've been telling us for years as to why we've got to go over there. But it's not the reality. The reality is we've had a long record of our government, these McWoke people who say they're so socially just, but yet they vote for people who go off and do drone strikes against families and kids. What's going on in this country? Why are we letting these losers run our lives and run the lives of people into the ground around the world? Fox News reports Blinken was vacationing. Wasn't Blinken the guy from Robin Hood Men in Tights, the guy who couldn't see? Blinken was vacationing in the Hamptons hours before Kabul fell. Okay, so that's what they were doing, hanging out in the Hamptons. That's where Obama eats his sunflower seed oil sludge birthday parties for his guests so he can be woke with his plant-based goop. But that's what these folks do. They're hanging out in their little posh enclaves with all the loot they've been able to extract from us. It's like Hunger Games. It's exactly like Hunger Games. They send our kids off to go fight and die for lies. They send our kids off into experimental products. They want it in 6-month-old babies, or sick freaks. Got no respect for human life, no respect for dignity and justice. And they want to live in their little enclaves And they don't ever do what they want us to be commanded to do. But there's signs of hope out there. I mean, I think I'm optimistic big league in the long term, but it's going to be rocky. Spain, Zero Head says Spain Supreme Court rules against using vaccine passports to restrict access to public spaces. It would be great if our Supreme Court had any spine, little linguini spine, that they seem to demonstrate for anything of merit or value, to strike down those ridiculous fascist passports. Hope that stays in Spain so we can have some places left in the free world after this is all dealt with. But that's what you get. You get pockets of sanity in the midst of this craziness. I talked to Doug Casey, the investor, today. It'll be an interview out soon. And he mentioned to me that it went from a mass hysteria to a mass psychosis. We got to help people get out of this delusion. We have to, before they tear everybody apart with their own flailing around. John Cardillo says, I'm hearing from people very close to TF Pineapple that the State Department is actively blocking the private extractions of Americans by our private operators. Why? Why is the U.S. government leaving Americans stranded to be killed in Afghanistan? Something very sinister going on. So the point here for me is, why would we trust this same kind of incompetent government when they can't get things right? They can't do things ethically abroad. Why do you think we should listen to them for our health advice? Okay. I'm going to keep saying that point over and over again because it's a simple, obvious reality we've got to wake up to. That if you can't trust these guys for telling you the straight facts for foreign policy, don't expect them to tell you the straight facts for their crony-run medical disasters. And it's obvious. It's right in front of us. The more we have given government control over our healthcare system and our nutrition, the skyrocketing diseases have just been skyrocketing exponentially. When we had more laissez-faire, freedom-based medicine, it wasn't without its flaws, but we didn't have dumb know-nothings in D.C. dictating to us to eat seed oil sludge and subsidizing it to make it so inexpensive for people to put it in all of our foods so that it really destroys our mitochondrial health, which is the foundation of dealing with new diseases like the pandemic and is the foundation of avoiding these chronic diseases. Basically, government, like for example, cancer was basically, and I'm using this metaphor, cancer was a disease before the introduction of government vegetable oil sludge. Cancer was like an indie band that was not discovered. And government took them and made them a top charting Billboard artist, #1 sales. That's what they did. Government policy of lying to us and misleading us for decades and generations to get people off of using butter and demonizing it to get us to use these cheap waste products that we call vegetable oils. And they use the word vegetable because they know you've been programmed by marketing to think vegetables are the healthiest things for you. So they use the word vegetable oil when it has nothing to do with anything that you would understand to be a vegetable. People literally probably think when you hear vegetable oils that they squeeze broccoli and squeeze it and some kind of little oil drop comes out of its life essence. No, that's not what happens, right? What happens is these are things from the seeds of soybean, corn, safflower, sunflower, cottonseed oil. These are waste products that they figured out how to bleach and deodorize to get the sludge look out of it so that they can sit there and oxidize the heck out of your body. And they bioaccumulate and they cause the basis for all of the hormonal problems, inflammation that we see, oxidative stress. And so meanwhile, while the BBC reports that kids are doing okay in general from the COVID deal, vast majority of them, still, because of our government's policy of slamming everything down to a close, obesity's up. And obesity is being driven by vegetable oils. So I'm trying to show you They're trying to tell you you've got to get their crony big pharma products in your kids, at 6-month-old and so forth. And and Fauci wants to mandate that. He would mandate that for 6 months old, probably. So he said he wants to mandate it for school kids. He wants to mandate it for anything. Right? But he won't tell you to stop eating vegetable oils. So which means he is not scientific. He's a dumb idiot. Because I'm a radio host and I've looked at the data and I've brought on the scientists and I've looked at the Frontiers in Physiology paper and many others showing how important it is to get these seed oils out of your life. And this loser can't do that. He can't tell you, hey, get out and get some sunshine every day. Get out there, get 30 minutes of exercise with your kid. Just walk around your neighborhood, walk around the park, get some sunshine. Avoid the corn syrup. Avoid the seed oils, most importantly. Get those things out of your life. You'll have tastier foods without it. He won't tell you that. He's a con artist. And so that's why it's frustrating, because you see in real people, especially kids who are vulnerable, just being the victims of these stupid con artists. Twitter, bans Alex Berenson. He was just a former New York Times science writer who's been just following the data out of Israel and other countries about these products and challenging the lockdowns and so forth, and they deleted him permanently. And Tom Woods, the podcast host and historian, he says, in other words, they banned him for telling truths 3 months before everyone insists they knew them all along. But this is not a time where we must be, just checking out. We have to keep fighting for what matters, our family, our kids' health. And I know that folks who are all in on the vaccines, that they are frustrated, and I want to empathize with them for a moment, because I know that there's a lot of people who've had to take it because they were pressured into it, right? Which is totally unethical, to pressure people into taking something with peer pressure when it's an experimental product without a long-term study on the long-term effects. But people feel pressured because they want to travel, they want to have a job, they're scared. So I feel sympathetic for a lot of people who've taken the product. And I feel sympathetic for people who are gleefully, ignorant of all the evidence that contradicts their position. Because ultimately, a lot of the people who have had the products, they're afraid that they made the wrong decision. And every time they see half the country or more still not going along with the two product deal, they feel like it threatens their sense of safety. Because every day they go out and say, wait, I took that thing, and yet that guy down the road still not doing it. So they have to go along with this narrative that the sleazebag media is gleefully excited to do, because that's what they do. They shill for government, like they shilled and lied to you about the war in Afghanistan being totally worth it for 20 years, and you listened to them maybe or whatever, maybe you didn't. And now they're doing it to you again. Oh, no. You must do what the government and big business tells you. If you don't, you're the problem. And then all of their narratives get debunked by the science again. But people still hold on to that because they're scared out of their minds. They take these products. They want to take care of their kids. They want to protect their family. They think they're doing what's right. But they're so stressed out. They're so, overwhelmed by the fear that they're consuming daily from these toxic media outlets, that when they see that many millions of people, in fact, the vast majority of the world population, I think it was like 15% of the world population, have had both shots or whatever. 15. So the vast majority do not have them. But they keep seeing that, and it bothers them because they don't want to have made a bad choice. They're scared. And they took a leap of faith, trusting in the state, trusting in the media that lied them into buying a house in 2007, telling them it would never crash, that lied them into the war in Iraq with weapons of mass destruction, slam dunk, don't worry, send your kids, it'll be fine. That lied them into stay in Afghanistan. In a year now, we'll fix it, and they'll become liberal Democrats, just like the D.C. elitists. They lied over and over and over again. They told them 90% chance Trump will lose in 2016. Remember? They lie and lie and lie about everything. But some people still believe it for whatever reason. And I feel bad for them because they feel like, okay, I took a leap of faith. I took this part that the media and the government told me to do. I obeyed. I'm a good person. I obeyed. Why are they not obeying? If they're not obeying, I'm scared. Maybe I shouldn't have obeyed. Maybe I should have waited a little bit. I was trusting in my state, and the state is the God that never fails. I must always trust DC. That's what I've been raised since I was in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. I was raised to pledge allegiance, to obey this state. And I obey the TV that mediates what the state wants to do for me. And they've always sold me that the state will never take me, for granted, that the state, unless a boogeyman like Trump gets elected who doesn't speak on script, but otherwise the state as an institution is always sacred and holy and righteous, and it will never hurt you as long as you just trust in them and put your skin in the game and self-sacrifice your autonomy for their schemes and their demands. So millions of people do that, and they do that unconsciously, and some of them do it consciously, that whole process in their mind. And when they see that other people don't obey, they say, good Lord, what did I do? It bothers them. It scares them. Because if you're more if you're more in tune with herd groupthink, then you look around to see the herd. And if you're saying, wait a second, half the herd's still not doing what I'm wanting, well, there must be a herd. And it's true. There's herd groupthink on the other side, too, that gets off into wrong directions and conspiracy theories. But the difference is one side has like near 90% of all the institutional corporations and banks and media outlets and social media cartels and all these things pushing one thing. The other one is scattered about in the alternative underground world or whatever, with all kinds of decentralized ideas and theories and so forth. And so they look at their mimetic rivals, the people who are not taking the products, they say, you are a monster, you die, you evil, because they're afraid that's going to happen to them. And deep down, they're afraid that maybe they misplaced their faith in the state. And maybe they shouldn't have gone along with the groupthink. It would have been much easier if 90% of everybody just got on board with doing it. They'd feel a lot more safer. But at the same time, typically when you get a near 90% conformity, the smaller the scapegoat class is, the more vicious and mean and nasty the rest of the people tolerate the way they're treated. I mean, that happens all over the world. There are people, I have to figure out the name, but there's a type of class in Japan of people that are treated like pariahs by their very existence. So people, especially when they can get the numbers of the scapegoat class to a really small percentage, becomes much easier for them to pick on and attack and be very callous and very, very malicious and mean. But that's where we're at today. That's why they have to use words like deworming and stuff like that to try to humiliate and demonize people, because those people scare the ever-loving heck out of people who have been blindly following their precious state's edicts their whole lives, and they don't want to believe that they made a mistake that could hurt them or not help them with the situation that we're in. So that's where you're getting that viciousness. That's the viciousness. And like I said, a woman, I heard her story. She got anaphylaxis from her first dose of the product and was medically unable to get the second dose, living in New York City. Now she says she's denied access to her job, social life, restaurants, and so on because of the New York City passport regime. So she can't go anywhere. She can't do anything. It's not her fault. She got an anaphylactic reaction to the first dose, tries to get the second one. She can't because she's got the reaction. She's medically not able to get the second one. So now she is depersoned. She can't keep her job because of these fascist punks like Biden pressuring people to all take this thing instead of getting his grubby hands off of our freedoms in science. He's distorting science, distorting reality, distorting the market. But because of that, and in New York City putting in this passport, now she can't go to. Can you imagine being in her shoes right now? She did what she was told. Her body rejected it. She can't physically get the second one, but because the stupid fascist punks in New York City mandate you got to get the 2 or you're not a person, she's in limbo land. She's already got the reaction that she got. She can't get the second one medically. Now she can't. Can you imagine that? You can't go to a coffee with your friend. You can't go to an indoor event. You can't go to the gym to exercise if you live in a concrete jungle like New York City. You can't, that's the place you go to exercise. She can't go there. She can't go to lunch. She can't go to dinner with her family members. She can't go to a concert, hear beautiful music. And they don't care. They're not bleeding hearts. They're fascist punks who are using this as a way to consolidate power for their corporate friends, because it's the small businesses that will be shut down the most from this scheme. Small businesses, chains will be able to comply with their little digital passport schemes. Gym chains will be able to survive better. Theater chains will be able to survive better. Restaurants, chains, they'll be able to survive better. It's the independent mom and pop places that are going to have a hard time trying to comply with implementing this kind of segregation. And they don't care because they are not bleeding hearts. They're just going along. And again, I sympathize with the folks who buy into their narratives, because some of them are bleeding hearts and they're being exploited emotionally by false narratives. But the people who are in charge of pushing these things, they don't seem like bleeding hearts to me. They seem like they're very callous. And that's sad. Let's take a quick break. We'll return. You can write your comments. I see some of them on our live stream. We'll get to some of them in just a moment, or you can call in at 727-587-1040.
A lawsuit is not something that anyone looks forward to. It's a stressful process. There are attorneys in Tampa Bay that keep clients well informed, creating less stress. That law firm is Catania. Personal injury law is defended with full disclosure. There is no guessing game. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania will handle the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't realize they have a claim for the loss until they talk to Catania. They only represent private individuals and treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's their way of practicing law. It's a commitment to you. Remember, they don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to Catania.com. Over 28 years in practice. Catania, personal injury, auto, and motorcycle accident attorneys. Catania, putting families first.
Office Tampa. Not attorney spokeswoman.
Hello, this is David Gronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a sixth-generation beautiful farm in Southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pastures beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR. A Neighbor's Choice is back. Looking at our comment stream, please everyone look into Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller. Support him, a commenter says. Another says, in my opinion, Biden doesn't deserve any praise. The Democratic Party and whoever runs it behind closed doors thought pulling out of Afghanistan would be an easy win and something that would help them in 2022. Unfortunately for them and the American people, their glaring incompetence kept the withdrawal from not being entirely botched. Another says we are experiencing increased knowledge at the same time as strong delusion. Another says obesity is projected to keep going up into the future. That's true. If our metabolic health gets bad enough, we become more vulnerable to everything. That's true. And that's the problem. These fools, it's the biggest crisis, and it's so avoidable, okay? Unlike, folks in government, we're not trying to hide where the source of these these come from. They hide where, oh, we didn't do the thing with the Wuhan lab. But we're not hiding that. We know where it came from. And it came from their misinformation. It came from people like Ansel Keys lying about what causes heart disease. Why? Because back then, big tobacco was owning government's mouth, right? See, government is like, it's rentable. Let's put it in kind words. They're for rent. So big tobacco rented their mouth for years for them to spew lies telling you, smoke these corporate cigarettes every day. Your doctor says they're fine. But they became out of favor for whatever reason. So they had to but at the time they had to scapegoat the heart disease problems that were arising. They pinned it on butter. And they pinned it on animal fats and so forth. So big tobacco won that PR campaign. And then eventually they started pushing people into vegetable oils more and more and more with their dubious guidelines. A commenter says, I saw an article that described ivermectin as a toxic livestock deworming drug. I mean, yeah, they're using these marketing terms that are not accurate. They know it's also used for humans, but they're just trying to belittle people who are more intelligent than them. They're very stupid, immature, toddler-like in these journalists. They're very stupid people. LOL, it has a great safety record in humans for 50 years now, so to call it toxic is pure deception. In fact, some scientists and doctors think the reason COVID hasn't been as bad in certain African countries is because they tend to default to the drug for many different illnesses. Another commenter says 200 years of seed oil contamination is what we're up against. It's true. That's what we're dealing with. So it's time to get the seed oils out of our kids' life completely. I'm going to keep telling you that. Don't listen to their foolish campaigns of fear and misinformation. They're quacks. Here's a quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the author. Once I used to hope that experience of life could be handed on from nation to nation and from one person to another, but now I am beginning to have doubts about this. Perhaps everyone is fated to live through every experience himself in order to understand. I think that's a well-put statement that has a lot for us to think about. And a commenter, Carrie, posted on there when I shared this, if doing the right thing was easy, everyone would be doing it. It's hard enough to get one's act together even when we know exactly what the problem is and have incentives to do so, because there are also short-term benefits in not doing so. We all want to have our cake and eat it too, but that's not possible. Overcoming the urge for instant gratification and making sacrifices towards the future is always a challenge. Most people have probably been taught this in one way or another at various times throughout their lives. It's just not an easy thing to accept or to put into practice. So if people and organizations struggle to improve, even when they know what the problem is and have incentives to do so, how difficult must it be to improve when those incentives are removed and the cost of failure is taken away? Life punishes those who abuse drugs, fail to save money, develop good habits, or maintain good health, etc., while free markets have a way of weeding out those businesses who perform badly. Government institutions, on the other hand, just get worse over time because the mechanism for improvement is not present, and the short-term benefits of being irresponsible are just too great. Well said. That reminds me of the title of the book, Democracy, the God That Failed. That renter's mentality is the problem in D.C., and we're going to build long-term sustainability in its place. I'm David Gronowski. Email me hello@aneighborschoice.com. Godspeed.